So I'm not a man of particularly strong beliefs, but there is one thing I know for certain, and it's that no game with a parry and critical attack system that can function as your primary means of healing can really be all that bad. And I don't spend enough time on the internet to have a good gauge on how the majority of people feel about Dead Island 2. I know one review aggregate site has the game sitting in the mid 50% range, which is criminal, and another has it in the high 70% range, which sounds about right. Regardless, since there's no quality control or rhyme or reason to any of this channel's content, and Dead Island 2 made the recent and probably inevitable jump to Game Pass, I figured it'd be fun to share my thoughts now that we're almost a year past the game's debut. If I were to be concise, I would sum things up by saying I think this is the perfect kind of title for a service like Game Pass. While it is a lot of straightforward fun, it's definitely a little lean for that $70 price tag that I keep forgetting is standard now. I think it's handily the best of the three Dead Island games for whatever small amount that's worth, but it also isn't trying to evolve all that far beyond them either. One of its great charms, really, is that it feels like a well-made 7th generation title while looking a bit sexier. The game takes place in Los Angeles, which, if any of you guys are fucking geography majors, you might notice is not an island. But I guess we're not going to worry about it. The game world is split into 10 concise but pretty densely packed regions, and you'll visit a lot of LA's more well-known neighborhoods. Now, I've only been down there once, and it was a hellhole that I was keen to leave rather quickly, so I'm not an expert in that department, but the environments definitely capture the different facets of sunny coastal living. Most of the areas are completely distinct while still feeling like part of a cohesive whole, and the game is really good about giving you enough story and loot motivation to see the majority of these places in one natural playthrough before any of them start to overstay their welcome. In general, the pacing through the game is right on point for me. There are no tedious grinding mechanics, no praying to the RNG gods. Basically, all of the things that big developers do to inflate the runtime of their games, this game does not. I think this is one of the huge advantages that this open zone design has over the open world formula that we've all become saturated in. It is so much easier to have good quality control and keep things interesting when you're not wasting time trying to make everything big. Now, the zombies do infinitely respawn basically the second you turn your back on them, so there's nothing stopping you from picking a zone you like and slaughtering to your heart's content, but that's hardly necessary in order to feel a strong sense of character progression. And the gameplay at its core is the remarkably simple kind of thing that you'd expect. This game wants you to kill thousands of zombies with interesting weapons, and not very much else. Your bludgeoning weapons feel appropriately weighty and brutal as they ragdoll zombies around in front of you. Bladed weapons, outside of the largest variants, don't have quite that same level of satisfying feedback, but they do frequently sever limbs, so if that does it for you, then you'll still be having a good time. The firearms are pretty fucking far from fantastic feeling, but they're really more of a situational tool in most playstyles. There's a small handful of puzzles that boil down to either find the thing to use on the thing, or turn these fucking wheels in the right order, and you'll be picking up crafting materials from all over the place as you trot along, but these pieces are not a focal point. The focal point, again, is beating zombies into actual pieces. You're given the choice between like 6 different playable characters at the start of the game, all of which represent a different build with unique starting traits. But for the most part, these traits aren't monumentally important, and replaying the game with a new character probably isn't going to feel super different. The ways that you can customize your run with perk cards regardless of who you play as can create a lot of variety though, and the perk cards can be swapped around to create a new build whenever you feel like. As far as defensive options, you've got the choice between dodges, which enable counterattacks, and blocks, which when timed right enable these sick-ass critical attacks. For me, the most satisfying way to play is focusing the build around one of these two abilities to maximize your reward and damage output for skillful play. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, for example, you'll get early access to perk cards that modify perfect blocks to cause a fucking Jedi force push around you, as well as giving you health back for both the block itself and the following critical attacks. And that shit is a constant dopamine explosion. As far as your weapons themselves, there is a pretty massive variety like you'd expect, but they all fall into one of a smaller group of weapon archetypes that attack more or less the same, maybe with slight variations to swing speed and the obvious differences to range. Your weapons and health scale right in tandem with enemy damage and health, so the experience of taking on a basic zombie is practically unchanged from the game's first hour to the last outside of your particular build flavor. How they do ramp things up is with the gradual increase of Apex variants, as they're called. These are your standard special infected, big beefy guys, fire spit guys, big beefy fire spit guys, screamers, exploders. You've seen most of them before. Additionally, a lot of the standard zombies will start having unique resistances, something as simple as armor over certain parts of the body, all the way to complete immunity against status effects like fire or shock. And throwing these in the pile forces you to mix up your approach, enough to keep the gameplay from becoming completely mindless, without making it actually, hard. Speaking of status effects, the game world is completely fucking rampant with sources of elemental damage. And before you get too far into the game, most of your weapons will have followed suit. You're basically never more than a jump and a skip from something that can be used to shock, melt, burn, or blow up the endless horde. Sometimes these environmental factors are just inherent, and sometimes they need a little help from you to get going. One of the simplest and most effective examples: imbue one of your ranged weapons with shock damage. Zombies standing around in water is a remarkably common occurrence here in LA, and just one quick bullet can put them all to bed. Playing through the game, I was reminded on several occasions of Divinity Original Sin 2, of all things, just because of the way I was constantly maneuvering to use the environmental hazards to my advantage. This handful of elemental upgrades, in addition to stuff like bleed and a posture breaking bonus, make up the vast majority of your weapon modification options. In the last third of the game, the modification tree will branch out, and you'll be given some more niche and playstyle dependent choices, but these are made using much rarer resources, so they should really be saved for your favorite gear. By contrast, those earlier mods might as well fall from the fucking sky. I think the devs wanted to make sure mods were accessible enough that you wouldn't feel like you had to hold on to older weapons just because you'd spent resources on them. And if that was the intent, I think they nailed it. The upgrade economy is very generous and well suited to the style of game. Now that we've covered the essentials, we should probably talk about the least important part of a game like this, which is its story and character writing. As far as all that goes, I think the question of your individual enjoyment is going to boil down to whether you enjoy that quirky,
that just happened,
style of comedy writing. I'm not even being hyperbolic. I was playing as Carla, and she says that verbatim, once in the base game and once in the DLC. I'll be transparent with you and say that this kind of cutesy millennial writing drives me up a fucking wall in most cases. It helps that the entire tone of this game is a halfway successful lampooning of modern culture, including language, but I don't think it's so smart that the writers were playing 4D chess with me. Outside of that, the game manages to hit most of the standard zombie movie tropes and swing for dramatic impact on a few occasions to varying levels of menial success, but I can more or less guarantee that nothing about this game's narrative is going to have you on the edge of your seat, and I pretty highly doubt that you expected otherwise. What it does have going for it is its clear emphasis on lighthearted fun. For comparison, Dying Light had, I think, slightly better, but similarly weak writing and characters, and it took itself far more seriously. Outside of the issue of that immediately clashing with this inherently silly zombie drop-kicking style of gameplay, it also opens you up to a lot more scrutiny. Side note, I'm not just trying to piss on Dying Light for no reason, I absolutely love that game. Anyway, Dead Island 2 probably isn't doing anything that will be brand new to you, and that goes for all aspects of it. But it does what it's derivatively setting out to do with strong style and really solid fundamentals, which, given the absolutely fucking nightmarish development process it had, is kind of impressive. And that would kind of be my closing thought on everything if I hadn't enjoyed my playthrough enough that I picked up the DLC expansion Haus, which goes for 13 bones here in the USA. And I can say, beyond any doubt, that this region, which is just one massive cultist compound, is my favorite portion of the whole experience. Like I said earlier, I really liked the base game's regions. They're smartly built, they're fun to move through, and they're pretty to look at. But I don't think you could consider them particularly creative, especially on the aesthetic side of things. They more or less had a real-world blueprint to follow when they were building them. Haus, by contrast, Feels like creative people got to do the crazy shit they really wanted to without fear of spooking a general audience. It has insane set pieces lifted directly from some schizo's fever dream, really tight and engaging levels and encounter design, a batshit story that's a fun take on the old Doomsday cult premise. I mean, the first thing I heard about the DLC was that it was entirely indoors, and I kinda groaned because the indoor levels in the base game are pretty handily its weakest. But the four wings of this compound are so varied and inventive that I didn't miss the sunshine and the bikini zombies for even a second. Now, mechanically, it's not really adding anything that will blow you away. It introduces crossbows to the game, and these are mandatory for completing some simple environmental puzzles around the compound. And your reward for finishing the expansion is a pretty fucking busted perk card, but mechanically they continued the base game's trend of playing it pretty safe. It's also not the longest expansion in the world, which I saw a lot of people in the review section of the Xbox store complain about. All things considered, I know that I was pleased with my purchase, but I'm not going to pretend that I know what the value of $1 is to all of you individually, so I can't really say whether I recommend you buy it. Anyhow, this entire ramble has had a terrible fucking flow to it, holy cow, but I think that sums up this little review. I don't tend to watch other reviews before writing my own, so if I just repeated a bunch of shit you already heard 11 months ago, I apologize. But if you're hearing this, then that means you're at the end, in which case, hello, you're my favorite viewer. And it must have been a little interesting, at least. Alright, I'm literally just fucking rambling now. Next video coming sometime this month, probably. I'll talk to you guys later.